Hello and welcome to my new video. This time we are talking about something a bit different from anime and manga, namely visual novels. And not some visual novels, but my 5 favorite visual novels. Although I have to admit I read probably around only 20 visual novels in my life, so I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I like them so much that I want to let the world know about it. I will talk about them as spoiler-free as possible, so I will talk a bit about the story, the main characters, themes, and the atmosphere without getting into too much detail. Many cyberpunk stories are about evil corporations, corruptions, rebels fighting the system, or some other massive conflict that threatens society, but this game isn't really about any of that, at least not directly. Valhalla takes place in that kind of setting, but it makes you a bartender. The game is essentially about listening to the problems of all kind of different people, living and surviving in the cyberpunk world, and of course mixing some drinks with it. We follow Julianne Natalie Stingray, or simply known as Jill. She is the main protagonist and the bartender at Valhalla in a city known as Glitch City. She is half French, a big smoker, and bisexual. She drinks a lot of beer but doesn't get drunk because of an implant she has. She has a cute black cat named Four, with whom she talks to every time she's at home. Jill always tries to give her best at work as a bartender, talking with her clients and always being nice, even with the most annoying people. Her catchphrase you will hear on every shift: "Time to mix drinks and change lives." Some say Jill tries to play the cool bartender, but she always says that she's just being herself and it's not an act. Even if Jill is serious most of the times with her clients, there are moments where she just bursts out laughing, often with childish jokes such as people asking for a drink bad touch. Jill doesn't go out much as she spends most of her time at home with her pet cat, Four, or at the bar. While at home, Jill browses different blogs, boards, and news on her phone. Instead of making dialogue choices like in most visual novels, your main way of interacting with the story is mostly through the cocktails you can mix. There is a big compendium and big variety of drinks you can mix, sorted into different categories. Some drinks also have the option to add as much alcohol content as you want to make people drunk, so different drinks can influence conversations, reveal new information, and sometimes even affect how character arcs develop. Throughout the game, a wide variety of people will visit the bar: androids, hackers, police officers, celebrities, mercenaries, and people who are simply just trying to get by. On paper, some of these characters sound pretty wild, but the writing gives them a good amount of depth. Every time you meet them, you learn some new things about their character. They feel like people with their own lives who happen to stop by your bar for a drink after work. Some customers become regulars, and over time you start recognizing their habits, their personality, and the things they are struggling with. A lot of the story revolves around identity, relationships, economic struggles, just finding meaning in everyday life. The game constantly reminds you that even in a futuristic world full of advanced technology, people still worry about the same things they do today. They worry about paying bills, finding purpose, dealing with regrets, maintaining friendships, and just figuring out where they belong. All of these ideas emerge naturally through the conversations with the characters and the interactions. Now let me talk about the atmosphere. The game has this incredible combination of cyberpunk aesthetics, synth music, rainy city nights, and late night conversations. Even though it is a dystopian setting, it is somewhat comforting spending time in the bar. It feels like hanging out in a place where people can temporarily escape the chaos outside. The synthwave and outrun music fits very well with the whole cyberpunk setting of the game. There are songs for many different moods, and the player can choose what they want to listen to in every bartender session, which is pretty nice. The game is overall just a vibe. By the end of it, it feels less like you've completed a story and more like you've gotten to know a group of people. If you're looking for a visual novel full of action, dramatic twist, and constant excitement, Valhalla is probably not for you. But if you like good character writing, a very memorable atmosphere, great music, and stories that focus on the people, it is definitely worth to play it. Another visual novel that is one of my favorites is Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Trilogy. I think part of its appeal is that it takes something that sounds pretty boring on paper, being a defense attorney, and turns it into a pretty exciting game. Stuff like intrigues, plot twists, and different angles on situations is daily business here. You play as Phoenix Wright, a rookie defense lawyer who gets thrown into a series of increasingly bizarre murder cases. Each chapter starts with a crime, and your job is to investigate the scene, talk to witnesses, gather evidence, and then defend your client in court. You try to find contradictions in testimonies and present conclusive evidence to prove the innocence of your clients. The trials are fast-paced, dramatic, and full of twists. Witnesses contradict themselves, prosecutors try to corner you, and the entire courtroom can flip upside down because of a single piece of evidence. And when you finally catch that contradictions, it feels pretty satisfying. The game also has a lot of cool characters. Phoenix himself is pretty relatable. He's not a genius detective or anything like that. Most of the time he's just nervous, improvising, and trying to keep up with the chaos around him. The series constantly balances serious murder mysteries with absurd comedy. Therefore, we have Maya Fey, his assistant, who brings out the game's humor and soul, pun intended here. And of course, you have the prosecutors, who aren't just villains, but people having their own philosophy, motivations, personal histories, and problems. Especially Miles Edgeworth is a great example for a good antagonist and later also protagonist. Because of his past experiences and background, we get to learn more of throughout the game. Edgeworth's conflict is rooted in a fundamental philosophical difference. He believes that a prosecutor's job is simply to secure a guilty verdict. Because he uses underhanded tactics such as concealing evidence or coaching witnesses beforehand, he presents a giant wall that forces Phoenix and the player also to fight harder for the truth. The changing tone in the game is also great. It can shift from a hilarious joke about witnesses' hairstyle to a genuinely emotional moment. The humor keeps the mysteries entertaining and adds some calmness, while the emotional moments give the cases real weight. Ace Attorney is constantly asking questions about truth and justice. The legal system in the game is often flawed, witnesses can be unreliable. Also, if you ever have a judge like this man in real life, good luck. This judge is just changing his opinion every 5 minutes. Phoenix's role isn't just to win his cases, it's to uncover what actually happened, even when the truth is inconvenient. It's about believing in people, challenging assumptions, and refusing to accept an easy answer when something clearly feels wrong. And honestly, very few games make me feel smarter than Ace Attorney does. So definitely a big recommendation. Another visual novel that left a big impression on me and is part of the science adventure series is Chaos Head. And it's one of the most unsettling visual novels I have played. The constant feeling of being paranoid about being watched was implemented so well. As a reader, you just feel unwell most of the time. What makes Chaos Head interesting is that, unlike other mystery stories where you are trying to uncover the truth with a capable protagonist, this game puts you in the perspective of Takumi Nichijo. He's a high school student who spends most of his time isolated from other people, living alone in a container on a rooftop of a building. He's withdrawn, anxious, paranoid, and far more comfortable interacting with the world through the internet than through real-life relationships. Rather than being someone you respect or admire, Takumi is intentionally very flawed and always difficult to relate to, and that's also what makes him an interesting protagonist. The game's story is set in 2009 in the Shibuya district of Tokyo. The story begins when a series of bizarre murder cases start to attract public attention. As Takumi becomes entangled in the whole murder mystery, strange events begin happening around him. He starts to encounter things that don't seem possible, receiving unsettling messages, and finding himself unable to determine what is real and what is just a delusion. The mildly disturbing phrase, "whose eyes are those eyes?" appears many times, also in combination with the murder case, and you always question the meaning and origin of the phrase and how it is connected to everything. The story is about uncertainty. Most visual novels want you to trust information being presented to you, but Chaos Head does the opposite. From the start of the game, it constantly makes you question everything you see. Is this event really happening? Did a conversation occur the way it appeared to? Is a character being truthful? Or is Takumi even interpreting reality correctly? As a result, the experience becomes incredibly tense because you are never completely sure whether the threat comes from an external danger or from the protagonist's own perception of reality. One of the unique aspects of the game is its delusion system that amplify the things I said before. Throughout the story, Takumi frequently imagines different possibilities during certain scenes. The game lets you then choose between pleasant fantasies, disturbing nightmares, or you can also choose none. And because the game allows you to experience these moments through his perspective, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate objective reality from his own imagination. Rather than telling you that Takumi is unstable, the game actively places you inside his mindset. Because of that, many of the themes revolve around perception and belief. Chaos Head explores how people construct their understanding of reality and how fragile that understanding can be. It asks questions about whether truth is something objective or is something heavily influenced by what people want to believe. The story also tackles loneliness and social isolation. Takumi spends much of the game disconnected from the people around him. He struggles to trust others and often retreats into his own thoughts and talks to non-existent Sera, a fictional character from an anime in the game, rather than confronting reality directly. That isolation becomes a major factor in how he experiences the events unfolding around him. Even though the game contains supernatural and sci-fi elements, many of its effective moments come from psychological tension. The fear doesn't come from creatures or violence, but from the uncertainty. The feeling that something is wrong. The feeling that everyone knows something you don't. And the feeling that you can no longer trust your own eyes. The atmosphere contributes enormously to this. The game constantly creates a sense of unease. Everyday locations feel threatening, ordinary conversations become suspicious, and even moments that should feel safe often carry a bit of anxiety. I think the main appeal of Chaos Head is the experience of gradually piecing together what's happening while experiences Takumi's distorted perspective of reality. The story eventually expands far beyond what it initially appears to be. What begins as a murder mystery slowly develops into something much larger, touching on questions about consciousness, perception, and the relationship between people and the world around them. That said, Chaos Head is probably not a visual novel I would recommend to everyone. Its protagonist can be pretty frustrating at times, and the story intentionally keeps the player confused for some parts of it. And I didn't know that a cute ringtone like that can actually make me so terrified. And some of its content can be pretty disturbing, but for people who enjoy psychological thrillers, unreliable narrators, and mysteries that constantly challenge your assumptions, it is definitely worth it. It also has many different paths and endings that can be experienced, depending on the type of delusions you choose in the story. Another visual novel that is one of my favorites is Umineko When They Cry, and it's one of those stories that is almost impossible to fully describe because it often changes what kind of story it appears to be. At first glance, Umineko looks like a classic murder mystery. The story takes place on a secluded island owned by the wealthy Ushiromiya family. A family conference is being held and relatives are gathering. The tension is high because Kinzo, the family head, doesn't have much time left because of his health, and every adult family member wants a piece of the inheritance. Then a storm cuts the island off from the outside world. Before long, people start dying under seemingly impossible circumstances. On paper, it sounds like a traditional locked room mystery, but Umineko quickly becomes much more than that. The protagonist is Butler Ushiromiya, a member of the family who finds himself caught in a struggle over the truth behind the murders. As the story unfolds, Butler is forced to confront a question that drives the entire visual novel. Are these crimes being committed by a human or by something supernatural like a witch? Does magic really exist, or is everything logically explainable? Most mystery stories eventually provide answers and move on, but Umineko is deeply interested in the process of searching for those answers. It challenges you to think critically about what they are seeing, to question assumptions, and to examine every possibility from multiple angles, or as Butler and Kyrie would say, flipping over the chessboard. What makes the experience so fascinating is that the game actively invites the reader to participate. You are not simply watching the mystery unfold, but you are trying to solve it alongside the characters. Every piece of information feels important, every statement could be meaningful, every scene might contain clues hiding in plain sight. The result is a visual novel that feels almost like a conversation between the story and the player. The Ushiromiya family is large, and at first it can seem overwhelming to keep track of all the people, but over time each character shows their personality, motivations, flaws, and their relationships with each other. The family feels messy and complicated, but that makes them also believable. They're not simply puzzle pieces within the mystery. And that's important because Umineko is ultimately just as interested in understanding people as it is in solving murders. A major theme throughout the story is truth. Not just whether something happened, but what truth actually means. Can two different interpretations of the same event both contain elements of truth? Is knowing a fact the same as understanding a person? How much can we really know about another person's heart and motivations? Another big point is perspective, I would say. The game constantly demonstrates how the same event can look completely different depending on who is observing it. People bring their own biases, assumptions, and emotion into the situation, and those factors shape the stories they tell themselves. What also sets Umineko apart is its atmosphere. It can be suspenseful, emotional, heartbreaking, philosophical, and occasionally even pretty funny. Some scenes feel like classic detective fiction, while others feel almost theatrical. The story often shifts between genres without ever losing its core. Then there's also the soundtrack, building tension or delivering some kind of revelation or presenting a dramatic confrontation. The music just fits every scene and mood perfectly. One thing that's important to know is that Umineko requires a lot of patience. This isn't a visual novel that rushes toward its conclusion, so it's pretty long and incredibly ambitious, and willing to spend time developing both its mysteries and the characters. And I'm talking here about more than 100 hours playtime. But it's also why the biggest moments hit so hard, that every answer feels important. The mysteries are excellent, but what stayed with me the most was its humanity. Beneath all the theories, debates, and impossible crimes is a story about understanding the people, looking beyond the first impressions and recognizing that every person carries different experiences and emotions that aren't immediately visible from the outside. What begins as a mystery about murders eventually becomes a story about love, loss, forgiveness, family, and the difficulty of truly understanding another human. Umineko has a lot of wild twists, complicated mysteries, and most importantly, it makes you think very deeply about truth, perspective, and empathy. In many ways, Umineko is a story about the power of stories themselves. And the game spends a remarkable amount of time exploring why humans create narratives in the first place. So although it will take some sessions to play through the entire game, I would say it is worth it. The House in Fata Morgana is my favorite visual novel of all time. It tells a tale about a romantic tragedy, and it is pretty difficult to talk about it without spoiling anything of the mystery and the story. You wake up in a mysterious mansion, not knowing where you are, how you got here, and who you are. The only person you immediately meet and who knows something is a maid. She's informing you that you are the master of the house and she your maid. The maid grabs your hand and shows you memories of the mansion. Each story part is presented as a door to a different time period and different characters, all people who once lived within the mansion. Everything for the goal to reclaim your missing memories. Initially, the stories feel disconnected from one another, the only connection being some characters that appear in multiple doors. You see different characters, different eras, and different tragedies unfold. But as the game progresses, you slowly begin to realize that everything is connected in some ways that aren't immediately obvious. For most, the game is interested in understanding people. The mysteries exist and they are important, but they are ultimately a means for exploring the characters and the emotions that drive them. It constantly questions your assumptions. You'll meet characters who seem to be obviously bad, only for the game to gradually reveal sides and layers of them that challenge your perspective of them. Yes, I'm also looking at you, Jacopo. Many times it asks you to reconsider what you think you know. Because of that, one of the central themes of the game is perspective. People often see only fragments of each other's life. We make judgments based on an incomplete information, misunderstand motivations, and create narratives that feel true even when they aren't. The house in Fata Morgana explores how easily that can happen and how much suffering it can produce. Another major theme is identity. Many of the characters struggle with questions about who they are, who society expects them to be, and whether they are allowed to define themselves on their own terms. It is also a story about prejudice and isolation. Many of the tragedies throughout the narrative stem from fear, ignorance, and the tendency for people to reject what they don't understand. The story also tackles pretty much all forms of discrimination. Class discrimination, being judged primarily by social status, gender discrimination, restrictions simply because someone is a specific gender, gender role discrimination, racial discrimination. Yeah, that's a lot. But despite its reputation as a dark visual novel, The House in Fata Morgana is not simply a depressing story. It definitely deals with heavy topics like suffering, loss, and cruelty. There are also many genuinely heartbreaking moments, but beneath all of that darkness is a story that feels deeply compassionate toward its characters. The game spends a lot of time exploring human flaws, yet it never feels interest in condemning people outright. Instead, it's interested in understanding them. It presents them as human beings who make mistakes, carry regrets, hurt others, and are hurt in return. The background music just fits perfectly for every scene and adds so much to the entire atmosphere. It paints the picture and the emotions of the characters so well. The artwork has a distinct style and is more realistic than the classic anime style, and it fits very good with the entire gothic aesthetic. Every room of the mansion feels filled with history, and every story leaves behind traces that still linger after you've moved on to the next door. What I think makes The House in Fata Morgana also very special to me is the emotional payoff. It's a story that asks for patience, it doesn't explain everything in your face, and it often leaves you with more questions than answers. But if you are willing to trust the journey, piece by piece, everything comes together. It's a story about love, identity, forgiveness, and what it means to remain human in the face of suffering. It tells an incredibly emotional story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it. If you want to experience a story with unforgettable characters, beautiful themes, and some of the strongest emotional writing the medium has to offer, The House in Fata Morgana is absolutely worth considering. So we reached the end of me talking about some of my favorite visual novels. I hope you enjoyed the video. Maybe you found something that you want to play now. I also have some more visual novels I myself want to read on my list. But I'm also open for new recommendations if you have anything for me. Thank you and see you in the next one.